Hey guys, tonight we dive into a game you didn't even know you were playing. Picture this: you walk into a room full of people and feel an odd sense of quiet power. Not because you're loud, rich, or beautiful, but because they need something from you. Information, approval, access, money, silence, maybe even protection. And they know you can give it or take it away. That's the twisted calm at the center of tonight's storm. We're exploring how people become dangerously valuable by design, and how Niccolò Machiavelli, yep, that Renaissance political mastermind, laid out a psychological trap that turns need into power, and power into near-invisible dominance. You probably won't survive this lesson without questioning your entire social circle or your place in it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this sleepy little tribe stretches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through life assuming power comes from being loud, smart, or useful, but Machiavelli knew better. He whispered through the centuries that true power comes not from strength, but from dependency. To be truly powerful, you must make others need you, emotionally, financially, socially, and keep them in that need, without them realizing it. It starts early, maybe in school, when you lend your homework answers to classmates. You don't demand anything in return, yet, but slowly, you notice they flock to you before every test. Suddenly, you're not just smart, you're necessary, and necessity is a drug. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that it's better to be feared than loved if you can't be both. But the part most people forget is what comes before that decision, making them depend on you. A prince doesn't stay in power just by being scary. He survives by being irreplaceable. This is the dependency trap, where your power doesn't come from what you do, but from what others can't do without you. And once you understand that, you stop trying to please people and start engineering your value, like a mad scientist in a dark castle full of emotional hostages. Biologically, humans are wired for reciprocity. Evolution baked this into your brain like a survival brownie. If I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. But Machiavellians, they scratch just enough to get your spine tingling, then keep the rest of the itch under their thumb. Here's a quirky historical tidbit for your sleepy mind. Ancient Roman generals used to spoil their soldiers with loot and glory, not just to reward them, but to make sure they'd never want to fight under anyone else. Their dependence became their loyalty. Their loyalty became the general's leash. Modern scholars still argue whether Machiavelli was advising tyrants or merely exposing them. Was he cynical, or just brutally honest? But here's what we do know. His tactics work frighteningly well in personal relationships, workplaces, even families. Think of the boss who trains you in just enough software to do your job, but never the full system, or the parent who gives affection only when you behave just right. Dependency isn't just about money or control, it's emotional. Ever had a friend who always needs your advice, who spirals without your approval, who crumbles if you stop replying for a day? That's not closeness, that's emotional entrapment, disguised as connection. And if you're honest, maybe you've done the same. You start to see that being valuable isn't about having something, it's about being the source. Once you're the source of wisdom, love, access, protection, they have to come to you, and if they have to come to you, they can't afford to lose you. Here's where it gets darker. You begin to realize that the truly dangerous people, those Machiavellian masterminds, don't flaunt their value, they drip it, slowly, predictably, like an IV bag of attention. They know if you pour too much, people feel full, but if you drip it just right, people will beg, wait, obsess, and obey. And you wonder, have you ever been that person, or are you the one who's been hooked? Because in the world Machiavelli described, there are only two kinds of people, the ones who build the cage and the ones who decorate it from the inside. You wake up every day thinking you're free. You sip your coffee, scroll through your phone, maybe glance at your to-do list, and feel that satisfying jolt of agency. You're doing what you want, when you want. But deep down, something's off. There's a strange pull, like someone's gently steering your choices. You think you're choosing the job, the partner, the habit, But Machiavelli would laugh softly and tell you this. People crave dependency the way moths crave flame, as long as the flame is wrapped in velvet. You see, freedom is exhausting, making decisions, terrifying, standing alone, a nightmare dressed as independence. Most people would rather feel safe than sovereign. That's why they cling to leaders, influencers, lovers, or even products that tell them what to feel and when to feel it. Take, for example, the phenomenon of parasocial relationships. People today will cry over YouTubers they've never met, or get emotionally destroyed when a podcaster takes a break. It's not because they're weak, it's because they're wired to need. And when someone supplies attention, comfort, or answers in a chaotic world, you start to depend. Here's a historical nugget that'll stick with you. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was a god. The people believed that without his presence, the sun might not rise. That's the ultimate dependency trap. Not only did the ruler feed and protect you, he made you feel that your reality was held together by his existence. Try walking away from that. Machiavelli never said this out loud, but it lurks between his lines. If you can make someone afraid to lose you, you own their choices, and the easiest way to do that, give them something they think they can't live without, and make sure they never quite have enough of it. Psychologically, this plays out in a phenomenon called intermittent reinforcement. A study by B.F. Skinner in the 20th century showed that if you reward a behavior inconsistently, random treats, unpredictable praise, it becomes more addictive than if you reward it regularly. Sound familiar? That's not just for lab rats. It's also how toxic relationships and manipulative bosses keep people hooked. People don't cling to you because you give them everything. They cling because you might. Now think back. That mentor who only praised you once every 6 months. That partner who showed sudden tenderness after days of silence. That manager who said, "You're not quite ready for the promotion, but I believe in you." That wasn't cruelty. That was craft. And your need for that next hit of validation kept you loyal. Quirky tidbit. In medieval France, nobles used to give peasants tiny plots of land just big enough to survive on, but never large enough to thrive. That wasn't an accident. It was strategy. A peasant who's starving will revolt. A peasant who's comfortable will wander. But a peasant who's just getting by, he stays exactly where you want him. Philosophers still debate whether humans actually desire freedom, or if it's a social illusion. Sartre argued that we're condemned to be free, that the very weight of choice is a burden. Alain de Botton, meanwhile, suggests we secretly long for guidance disguised as destiny. You start to understand that dependence isn't a prison, it's a padded room with snacks, Wi-Fi, and a curated playlist. The trick is to want the cage. So what happens when you become the person who builds that cage? You begin by offering safety. Maybe it's your emotional stability, your connections, your resources. But once someone accepts it, once they lean in, you ease back. You don't abandon them. You just make them lean a little harder next time. And slowly you become the thing they orbit around. The invisible sun in their universe. You don't have to control them. You just have to be the one they can't imagine functioning without. It's not evil, it's elegant. And you start to realize something else. People thank you for the cage. They call it love, leadership, loyalty. Sometimes they tattoo your name on their heart and tell their friends you changed their life. You just smile quietly and never correct them, because deep down you know the truth. Machiavelli whispered 500 years ago, "The one who gives dependency always takes the crown." You're starting to see the pattern, aren't you? Every relationship, whether it's romantic, professional, or familial, has an invisible scoreboard. Not of love, not of kindness, but of usefulness. You might want to believe you're loved for who you are, but Machiavelli would cock an eyebrow and ask, would they still love you if you couldn't offer them anything? It's a bitter question that tastes like betrayal, but it's a necessary one, because tonight you learn Machiavelli's coldest truth. People don't fear being unloved, they fear being unnecessary. Walk into a room where no one needs you, and suddenly your value feels like a leaky bucket. You joke, and no one laughs. You offer help, and they decline. You exist, but you don't matter. That's the modern exile, not from land or tribe, but from function. From the moment you could talk, someone praised you when you did something helpful, put your toys away, good boy, got straight A's, so proud of you, supported your friend through their crisis. What would they do without you? Over time, love got braided with usefulness, and just like that, your nervous system decided to be loved is to be needed. But Machiavelli flipped that on its head. He asked, what if you could make others feel that way about you? The strategy is brutal in its simplicity. You embed yourself into someone's structure, like emotional scaffolding, and then slowly become the thing holding up their sense of stability. You offer advice, resources, praise. You become the translator of their confusion, the comfort to their anxiety, the rope they grab in emotional quicksand. And then, you pull back, just slightly, enough to make them feel the chill of your absence. This isn't manipulation in the cartoon villain sense. It's maintenance, a quietly adjusted dial. You learn to modulate your usefulness, so that people don't replace you, they rely on you. There's a mainstream phenomenon in workplaces called institutional knowledge hoarding. Employees who fear being replaced often forget to document their processes or cross-train others. Why? Because if only they know how to fix the glitch, pull the report, or calm the angry client, they stay valuable. They become irreplaceable by becoming the only bridge to a specific solution. Is it ethical? Not really, but it works. And Machiavelli wasn't writing moral philosophy, he was writing survival strategy. Now here's a quirky real-life example that's easy to miss. Queen Elizabeth I famously refused to marry, not just because of personal reasons, but because she knew staying single made her the center of political attention. Every European monarch wanted her hand. Every noble hoped to influence her. By denying the role of wife, she became something more, an eternal prospect, a diplomatic question mark, a goddess of maybe, and they danced for her attention for decades. Philosophers still argue whether usefulness is a social construct or a biological imperative. Some argue that in tribal times, every member had to serve a role or be left behind. Others point to psychological development. A child learns quickly that crying gets attention, silence doesn't. So the script gets written, be useful or be forgotten. The modern twist. You start seeing people build entire personalities around being needed. The fixer friend, the overachieving co-worker, the emotionally supportive partner who never says no. But here's the twist. Machiavelli would raise a glass to the most powerful person in the room isn't the most helpful one. It's the one whose help can't be replaced. There's a difference between being liked and being needed, and there's an even deeper difference between being useful and being uniquely useful. So how do you make the shift? You stop broadcasting your talents like a street vendor. You start choosing which of your values you share, and with whom. You don't offer yourself on every menu. You become a limited edition, and like the rarest items in an auction, your value skyrockets not because of what you do, but because of what people believe will be lost without you. That's when you cross the line from just being helpful to being dangerously valuable. You've been taught your whole life that giving is good. Be generous, be kind, be helpful, but no one warned you about the dark side of giving, about how generosity, when too predictable, too plentiful, too free, becomes invisible. Machiavelli would lean over your shoulder right now and whisper, never give everything at once, never be the overflowing river, be the drought followed by a trickle, because tonight, you learn the art of withholding, not out of cruelty, but out of strategic clarity. Let's start with a sensory image. Picture someone holding out their hand to you. They ask for advice, love, attention, a little money, a second chance. You've been giving it freely for months, maybe years. Then one day you pause. You hesitate. You say, not today. The silence that follows, that's your real value speaking. You don't become powerful by what you give. You become powerful by what you choose not to give, and by how long you can make them wait. There's a psychological mechanism here called reactance. It's what kicks in when people feel denied or restricted, when you withhold something they've grown used to receiving. their brain interprets it as loss, and the value of what you've withheld increases. They want it more, not less. Quirky tidbit: in 14th century Venice, salt was more valuable than gold, not because it was rare, but because the ruling elite controlled its distribution. They restricted access, just enough to keep demand high. They didn't flood the market. They dripped power through scarcity. And you, sitting quietly in your relationships, your job, your family, you start realizing you've been handing out buckets of your value when all you needed was a dropper. Let's talk romance for a moment. You ever notice how the person who's too available gets boring fast? It's unfair, but it's real. Human desire is fueled, not by fulfillment, but by delayed gratification. That's why people chase emotionally distant partners, admire aloof mentors, or obsess over the one who replies slowly but meaningfully. It's not about cruelty, it's about pacing the reward. Scholars still debate whether Machiavelli's emphasis on controlled generosity was about ethics, or just control. Was he trying to help leaders maintain loyalty, or prevent chaos? But the principle is the same. If you give too much, you're consumed. If you give just enough, you become a source. Modern workplaces echo this. Ever noticed the co-worker who's always covering shifts, answering emails at midnight, volunteering for extra work, and slowly becoming invisible? That's because their generosity becomes expected. It's no longer a gift, it's the new normal. But then there's the one who shows up with unexpected brilliance, who says yes sometimes, and always makes it count. That person becomes the quiet legend. They're not everywhere, but when they are, people listen. They've mastered the Machiavellian craft of selective generosity. Here's the trick: withhold not to punish, but to create craving. You're not manipulating. You're teaching others to respect the flow of your energy. Say less, show up less, offer less, but make sure what you do offer is gold. True, that's how diamonds are formed, not by being abundant, but by being rare. And let's be honest, you've been draining yourself for people who don't even remember your last act of generosity, not because they're ungrateful, but because you made yourself too accessible. So now, you pull back, not with spite, but with strategy. You start noticing which of your gifts are underpriced. Your time, your patience, your attention. You stop flooding, you start rationing, and suddenly, people notice. You aren't less kind, you're just more dangerous in your kindness. It's because every time you say yes now, they hear the echo of the times you didn't. That's when generosity becomes power, not just a virtue. And that's when your value stops leaking and starts compounding. By now, you've tasted the edges of a Machiavellian truth. Power isn't loud, it's slow. It doesn't announce itself with a bullhorn. It arrives in whispers, in patterns, in systems, and tonight, you're about to build one. You see, most people think dependency just happens, that it's the byproduct of love, need, trauma, or trust. But the truly dangerous individuals, the ones Machiavelli would tip his velvet hat to, they don't stumble into power, they design it. You're about to learn how to engineer dependence by design. Start with something simple. Imagine you offer someone help on their resume, their heartbreak, their goals. You come through. Now they trust you. So, you do it again and again. But each time, you make them feel like they couldn't have done it without you, even if they could. You don't rub it in, you hint, just enough to place a seed in the soil of their mind. If it weren't for you, that seed becomes a vine that winds its way around their confidence, and soon, it needs watering. You're watering, because you didn't just help them, you designed the situation to need your help again. Sounds sinister? Welcome to Machiavelli's playbook. He wrote that the most effective rulers are not the ones who force obedience, but the ones who make people grateful for their chains. And in the modern world, that doesn't happen through whips or taxes. It happens through subtle, consistent reinforcement of reliance. In psychology, there's a concept called learned helplessness. It's when someone experiences enough failure or overwhelm that they start to believe they can't help themselves, even when they can. The brain gives up. It says, someone else has to fix this. Now, imagine if you could create that, not by trauma but by design. Here's a fringe but eerie example. Cult leaders don't start by locking doors. They start by offering clarity in chaos, a warm smile, a place to belong. Slowly they chip away at your independent decision-making by offering just enough relief to keep you close. And eventually you don't trust your own thoughts. You trust theirs. You don't need to run a cult to apply this. You just need to become someone's solution, so consistently that they forget how to solve anything without you. And no, it's not always malicious. Parents do this to kids without realizing it. Partners do it out of fear of losing one another. Managers do it to prevent losing control. The intent might be innocent, but the design, it's still dependency. So, how do you build it? Step 1. Offer something valuable, but not easily replicable. Could be emotional safety, could be strategic insight, could be a skill, but don't just give it. Let them feel the difference between your presence and your absence. Step 2. Customize your support. Don't just help everyone the same way. Make each person feel like their connection with you is unique, like no one else could quite offer what you do. Step 3. Slowly remove optionality. Not forcefully, just guide them away from other sources of help. Oh, that coach, I've heard mixed reviews. Yeah, therapy's great, but it didn't work for me either. I just get you in a way others don't. And suddenly they're back in your orbit. Not because you built a cage, but because you made outside options feel unsteady. That's the difference between control and design. You don't demand loyalty. You curate the conditions where leaving you feels like a gamble. Here's a curious historical tidbit. In the Ottoman Empire, rulers often kept their own sons under palace education, shielding them from military or political training. Why? So the Sultan would remain the only stable axis of power. His sons, while biologically royal, lacked the machinery of rule. The throne became not a birthright, but a dependency structure. Scholars still argue whether Machiavelli would approve of such long games. Some say his teachings emphasized quick power grabs. Others suggest he admired the slow erosion of independence, as long as it yielded total influence in the end. Either way, you now see the blueprint. You stop hoping to be liked, or even loved. You start building systems, quiet ones. Ones where people choose you again and again, until it's not really a choice anymore. It's a reflex. That's how you design dependence. Not by dominance, but by architecture. You don't win the game by giving more. You win by making less feel like everything. Tonight you walk into the heart of Machiavelli's most delicious strategy, one so subtle, so unnervingly effective. It feels almost accidental when you fall into it, but it isn't. It's a system, and it works best when you turn your life into one long, carefully managed hunger. You're about to build what he would call a hunger economy. Let's start with an image. You're feeding birds in the park. The first time, you throw handfuls of crumbs, chaotic, generous. They come, they feast, they leave. Next time you drop just a few pieces, one by one, far apart. You wait. They come slower, but they stay longer. They study you. They start watching your hands. Waiting. That's how value works in the hunger economy. Not by abundance, but by controlled starvation. You've seen this in relationships, haven't you? The parent who gives praise once every 3 report cards. The boss who dangles a promotion like a mirage. The partner who offers affection like a rationed commodity. You ache for it, not because it's the best, but because it's the only thing on the table. Machiavelli knew this. He wrote, "Men desire novelty in fortune, but are governed by the hope of its return." Translation: people don't just want reward, they want the possibility of reward. That's where the addiction lives. Let's get modern for a second. Think about social media. Why do you keep refreshing? Because it feeds you unpredictably. One moment, 10 likes. The next, a flood. The algorithm keeps you hungry. And your attention, that's the price. Same with people. Same with power. There's a psychological study that showed rats preferred a liver that gave random rewards over one that gave consistent ones. they'd press until exhaustion. That's not stupidity. That's dopamine science. And you, my dear bedtime philosopher, are just a slightly more sophisticated rat. Quirky tidbit for your sleep-deprived brain: in medieval monasteries, monks were sometimes fed less during spiritual fasting seasons, not just for religious purity, but because hunger made them more dependent on divine instruction. An empty stomach became a full submission. You start to notice that people, at work, at home, even in your inbox, respond not to consistency, but to carefully timed scarcity. When you give too much, they feast and forget. When you give less, they wonder, they check, they anticipate. That anticipation, that's the new form of control. But let's go deeper. This isn't just about playing coy, it's about creating an economy, one where you are the currency, where your approval, your insight, your energy is traded at high value, because it's never guaranteed. And how do you create that? First, you establish a baseline. Be valuable once, maybe twice. Prove your worth early. Second, you withdraw slightly, just enough to create discomfort. You don't ghost, you delay. Third, when you return, make it matter. The crumb must taste like cake, and suddenly you're no longer just a person. You're a dispenser of meaning. People start assigning weight to your presence. They remember your phrasing. They feel anxious when they haven't heard from you. They reread your messages like prophecy, because you've taught them what Machiavelli taught princes: never let them feast freely. Feed them just enough to keep their mouths open. Scholars still argue whether this hunger model is exploitative, or just reality wearing no makeup. Is it manipulation, or is it the truth about human engagement, that our loyalty isn't bought by abundance, but by controlled uncertainty? You decide. But from this point on, you stop being the overflowing well. You stop being the always available shoulder, the unlimited advice giver, the eternal fixer. You become the drought with one cup of water, the whisper in a loud room, the maybe in a world of yes or no. And that's when your value multiplies, quietly, hungrily, without warning. Because in a hunger economy, the one who holds the crumbs holds the world. You've been told your whole life to speak up, raise your hand, assert yourself, be seen, be heard, be bold. But tonight, you flip that advice on its smug little head. Because Machiavelli knew something most people miss: when you're constantly visible, constantly talking, constantly proving your worth, you become familiar, predictable, and worst of all, forgettable. Tonight, you learn the quiet, devastating power of playing dumb. Now hold on. This isn't about shrinking yourself or faking stupidity. This is a weaponized stillness, a posture, a cultivated blankness that lets everyone else underestimate you while you watch, plot, and wait. Picture this: you're in a meeting. Everyone's tossing around jargon like frisbees. You know the answer to the problem, but you don't say it. Not yet. You wait. Let others fumble, contradict each other, spiral into half-baked plans. Then, when the tension reaches its peak, you calmly offer a simple solution, and the room exhales. You weren't just right, you were surgical, and surgical people, they're remembered. That's what playing dumb gets you. Time, observation, leverage. There's a psychological concept called the pratfall effect. It shows that highly competent people become more likable when they show a small flaw or make a minor mistake. Why? Because perfection is threatening. But if you downplay your brilliance just enough, people trust you more. Quirky case study. In ancient China, military strategist Xu Liang pretended to be unwell and weak before battle. He left his gates open, sat calmly playing a flute as the enemy approached. The invading army assumed it was a trap and fled. There was no army, just perception. Liang didn't need to fight. He let his invisibility win the war. You begin to see the genius of strategic underperformance. While others rush to center stage, you remain backstage, studying their moves, tracking their tells, memorizing the timing of their ambition. And when you do move, it's with precision, with gravity, because no one saw you coming. Here's a modern example: the quiet co-worker, who seems harmless, never brags, never interrupts. But they always know the numbers. They always have the boss's ear, and suddenly they're promoted, while the louder ones are still arguing over credit. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must appear merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious, but not necessarily be any of those things. It's about perception, and nothing fuels false perception better than intentional underestimation. You become the pebble they ignore, until it cracks their window. Now, don't mistake this for cowardice. Playing dumb doesn't mean being passive. It means you choose when and where to reveal what you know. It's not suppression, it's curation. So how do you do it? Step 1. Let people speak first, always. The more they say, the more they reveal, not just information, but insecurity, hierarchy, intention. Step 2. Ask clarifying questions, not to learn, but to make them explain. This creates the illusion of your ignorance while exposing theirs. Step 3. Deliver your insight last. Never rush. Let it land like a final nail in a debate that's already collapsing. This doesn't just apply to meetings. In relationships too. You act like you don't know they're trying to manipulate you. You nod. You listen. You let them believe they're smarter, more powerful, more in control, until they need your help. Until they realize you've been holding the emotional blueprint this whole time. Philosophers still debate whether silence is submission or strategy. Some say it's avoidance, others call it the root of wisdom. But in the world of Machiavelli, silence is not absence, it's camouflage. So from now on, you stop explaining, you stop oversharing, you stop auditioning for relevance. You become the quiet node of observation, the one no one accounts for, until it's too late. Because underestimated people don't get blocked, they get in, and when you finally speak, act, decide, the impact echoes. You've probably been told to avoid conflict, to play nice, to keep the peace. But Machiavelli would roll his eyes so hard they'd echo through Florence. Because tonight, you learn a truth. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding the most dangerous threat to your influence. Isn't your enemy. It's the person who doesn't need you anymore. Let that sink in. The enemy is visible, loud, predictable. But the self-reliant, they disappear without a sound. They unplug from your emotional circuitry and walk away with the confidence of someone who's seeing behind the curtain and realized they don't need the magician. Tonight, you learn how to identify, isolate, and if necessary, eliminate the independent. Now, before you reach for your poison rings and medieval daggers, relax. We're not talking about murder. We're talking about recognizing the moment someone becomes immune to your influence and choosing not to nourish that immunity. Because if you're building your life around being indispensable, then the greatest danger is someone who actually isn't dependent on you at all. Start with the workplace. You have someone on your team who asks questions, follows your advice, seeks your approval. They feel safe, predictable. Then one day, they stop. They no longer need your input. They start talking directly to your boss, or launching their own initiatives, or simply doing better without you. That's not betrayal, that's evolution. And evolution, in a power structure, is fatal. Machiavelli warned rulers never to let power decentralize, because once your subjects believe they can act without you, they will. Psychology backs this up with a concept called autonomous motivation. People who act from internal drive, not external validation, are harder to control. They don't need rewards. They don't fear your withdrawal. They're self-sustaining. And in a hierarchy built on dependence, they are walking acts of rebellion. Here's a quirky, eerie tidbit. In ancient Sparta, any child who showed too much individualism, too much imagination or rebellion, wasn't celebrated. They were watched, quietly sidelined. The Spartans knew a single free thinker is more dangerous than an army of obedient ones. You've seen this in relationships too. That friend who no longer asks for your opinion, the partner who stops reacting to your silence, the sibling who starts living their own truth without needing your applause. And what do you feel when that happens? Not always anger. Sometimes it's panic, because their self-reliance doesn't just free them, it exposes the illusion that you were ever central. Machiavellians aren't scared of enemies, they're scared of disinterest, because disinterest is the death of influence. So what do you do when someone in your world starts becoming self-sufficient? You have two options. Option 1, re-entangle. You subtly reinstate their need for you. Maybe you offer an opportunity only you can provide. Maybe you remind them gently of past help, shared history, or exclusive insight. You don't beg to be needed.
You create a new dependency loop.
Option 2, let them go, but isolate their ideas. If you can't control the person, you control how others perceive them.
You shift the narrative.
She's brilliant, but not a team player. He's talented, but emotionally distant. You plant seeds of doubt, not to destroy, but to protect your ecosystem of reliance. Dark? Sure. Effective? Absolutely. Philosophers still argue whether it's moral to marginalize the independent, or if it's just another defense mechanism of fragile egos. But remember this, influence isn't permanent. It's a contract, and one that can be broken the moment someone realizes they don't need you. So your job, watch for the cracks, the drifting, the quiet glow of self-trust in someone's eyes. And when you see it, don't react with panic, react with precision, because from now on, you know, it's not the loud traitor who threatens you most, it's the silent one who no longer looks to you for answers. You've likely heard that freedom is beautiful, that it's the ultimate goal, that everyone wants to be free. But tonight, we rip the mask off that noble idea and show you what Machiavelli saw underneath. Freedom is terrifying, and if you give someone too much of it, they'll start to forget you ever held the door. You're about to understand why the most Machiavellian minds offer freedom, the way a carnival magician offers choice theatrically, seductively, and never without a hidden string. Because true freedom, the kind where someone doesn't need your opinion, your help, your approval, your love, that's not just a loss of influence, that's erasure. Let's start small. You give your partner space. You want to be supportive, not overbearing. But weeks go by, and you realize they haven't reached out for your thoughts. They've made decisions alone. They're happy, without consulting you, and you start to feel invisible. That's not a rejection. That's just them stepping into freedom, and it stings. Because freedom breaks dependency, like acid breaks rope. Machiavelli understood that too much freedom creates forgetting. People forget the ones who helped them get there. They stop checking in, they stop returning the favor, and worst of all, they stop needing you. Now here's a bizarre historical tidbit. During the Haitian Revolution, many former slaves who had fought tooth and nail for freedom ended up re-establishing class-based systems, putting others into dependency roles. Why? Because freedom is exhilarating, until it becomes lonely. People crave hierarchy once the honeymoon wears off. Not because they're weak, but because they need structure. Psychologists call this dependency reversal, where someone gains freedom, then subconsciously seeks a new anchor. It's why people leave toxic relationships, only to recreate the same pattern with a different partner. Freedom is destabilizing. We crave gravity. Scholars still debate whether humans naturally incline toward autonomy, or secretly prefer being told what to do. Sartre claimed we're condemned to be free, and that freedom is a burden many flee from. Meanwhile, Erich Fromm argued that we escape freedom by clinging to systems, identities, and authority figures who promise safety. So what does a Machiavellian do? They never give freedom raw, they wrap it in reminders. Let someone explore, but keep your fingerprints on the map. Offer options, but shape their consequences. Encourage independence, but plant seeds of doubt. Are you sure that's the best approach? Well, you know I'm always here, if it gets messy. Just remember who helped you get this far. It's not manipulation, it's preservation of relevance, of proximity, of psychological anchoring. Because if you give freedom without structure, people float away. But if you give it like a slingshot, you pull them back when they drift too far. This is why great leaders give autonomy, with boundaries. Why powerful parents allow risk, but within a curated sandbox. Why brilliant manipulators grant you wings, with a GPS tracker buried in the feathers. You don't deny freedom, you just frame it. You become the invisible architect behind their choices, so that even when they believe they're free, they're still orbiting your influence. Let's apply this. At work, delegate responsibility, but always hold the last key. Make yourself indispensable to the final step. In relationships, celebrate their growth, but attach emotional memory to your support. Let them associate their becoming with your presence. In friendships, don't demand attention. Instead, offer rare wisdom, something that lingers longer than any constant contact. Because once people taste true freedom, they often forget who stood beside them in captivity, unless you've made yourself unforgettable. And how do you do that? You give freedom slowly, deliberately, with the occasional rope tug, with the occasional look that says, "You're free to go, but everything meaningful still leads back to me." That's not oppression, that's strategy. Because if you let them run too far, they'll learn they can live without you, and once they do, they rarely look back. You've likely been warned about manipulative people, but no one warns you about the helpless ones. The soft-voiced, well-meaning, tragic souls who seem like they're barely holding on. You offer them your shoulder, your time, your resources. You become their emotional oxygen, and just like that, you're hooked. Tonight, you meet Machiavelli's most disarming weapon, the sympathy trap. This trap doesn't arrive with demands or ultimatums. It arrives with trembling hands, teary eyes, and sentences that start with, "I just don't know what I'd do without you." It's subtle, it's quiet, it looks like vulnerability, but it binds like a vice. You see, Machiavelli understood that power isn't always about dominance. Sometimes, it's about making people feel responsible for you, and there's no faster way to do that than to appear as someone who might collapse without their help. Let's zoom in. You've probably had that friend or partner who always seems to be in a crisis, emotionally, financially, existentially. They're not aggressive, they don't push, but they bleed need. And every time you try to pull away, you feel guilty. You hear that little voice. They need you. So you stay, you give, you rescue. Again and again. That's not friendship anymore. That's emotional indenture. Psychologists refer to this dynamic as covert dependency, a strategy often used by emotionally immature people. See Lindsay C. Gibson. To keep others close, without explicitly asking for control. They present as powerless, but their power lies in the burden they place on you. Quirky historical example. During his exile, Napoleon Bonaparte would write letters to his former allies painting himself as a broken and misunderstood genius, longing for redemption. Many of them, despite having every reason to cut him off, stayed emotionally invested. Some even helped him reclaim power, not because he threatened them, but because he made them feel sorry for him. The sympathy trap works by inverting roles. The person who seems weak becomes your puppeteer, and you, the strong one, slowly surrender your freedom, not from fear, but from compassion. Philosophers still argue, is emotional dependency manipulation, or just a cry for connection? Alice Miller believed unresolved childhood trauma often leads people to unconsciously recreate dynamics where they're helpless again, because that's the only way they learn to receive love. But here's the dark twist. Machiavelli would point out, it doesn't matter whether it's conscious, what matters is whether it works. And oh, it does. So what's the Machiavellian response? Step 1. Recognize emotional bait. Look beyond the surface sob story and ask, is this pattern or incident? Step 2. Resist the savior role. Helping someone once is kindness. Rebuilding their life every month is a strategy they may not even know they're running. Step 3. Replace rescue with boundary. Offer tools, not crutches. Make their progress theirs, not yours. You don't become cruel, you become clear. Because the sympathy trap only works if you internalize their pain as your duty. Once you stop doing that, their power dissolves. Let's be honest. This trap works especially well on people like you, smart, caring, the kind who wants to be the difference in someone's life. And that's beautiful, until it becomes a leash. Remember, guilt is the softest chain, and Machiavelli would warn you, soft chains last the longest. So from now on you watch for the teary-eyed tyrants, the innocent anchors, The ones who make your departure feel like betrayal. You love them, you care, but you don't carry them. Because the moment you start living someone else's emotional survival story, you stop being a person, you become a resource, and resources, they get used. You've seen this story play out 100 times. There's a crisis, real or manufactured, tension thickens, people panic, and then someone steps in, calm, capable, all-knowing. They solve it, they hold the room together, they become the hero. But what if the hero wrote the script? Tonight, you enter the Machiavellian theater of the savior illusion, where chaos isn't just endured, it's engineered. Not because someone loves destruction, but because they know this. If you fix a problem, people admire you. But if you fix a problem you caused, people worship you. You begin to understand that not all storms are accidents. Some are invitations, and Machiavelli would argue that the most enduring loyalty isn't forged in peace, but in the aftermath of a fire you secretly lit yourself. Let's build the blueprint. First, you create dependency. Then, you threaten its stability, not overtly, not cruelly, just enough for others to feel the edge of loss. Maybe you step away, delay a response, allow a small mistake to unfold, and just before things spin too far, you step back in, you solve it, you restore order. You don't just become useful, you become the only one who can fix it. There's a psychological concept here, problem-reaction-solution. It's often cited in political theory, but it works everywhere. You introduce attention, you wait for the panic, then you present yourself as the resolution, and in doing so, you write yourself into everyone's sense of stability. Quirky historical tidbit: Emperor Diocletian of Rome once divided the empire, increased bureaucracy, and created economic chaos, only to later step forward with a bold new restructuring plan that saved the same system he had helped fracture. Historians still debate how much of the original problem was intentional, but in his wake, people saw him as a master organizer, a bringer of order. His earlier meddling, forgotten, because people don't track cause, they track relief. The same dynamic plays out in relationships. Have you ever met someone who seems to attract drama, only to constantly be the one who calms things down? The partner who instigates a fight, leaves in anger, then comes back with flowers and an apology speech so polished it deserves a Netflix special. That's not recovery, that's narrative control. Because when you create a cycle of instability that only you can resolve, you make yourself irreplaceable. Scholars still argue whether this behavior is strategic or subconscious. Patrick Tehan might suggest it's a survival pattern rooted in family systems where chaos equaled connection. Others believe it's learned Machiavellianism, a calculated method of asserting dominance through volatility. But again, Machiavelli wouldn't care about the why, he'd care about the result. So how do you apply it? Step 1. Identify a tension others don't know how to solve. Maybe it's interpersonal, maybe it's technical, maybe it's emotional. Step 2. Let it breathe. Let the discomfort build, not dangerously, but noticeably. Watch people fidget. Watch them scan the room for leadership. Step 3. Solve it calmly, efficiently, and ideally in a way only you could have. You become the calm after the storm, without revealing that you also smuggled in the thunderclouds. Let's say you're the team member who understands the back-end system no one else wants to touch. You forget to fix a glitch until people start to panic. Then you step in and save the day. Or maybe you're in a social circle where you subtly stir tension between two friends. Nothing explosive, just passive competitive tension. And when it bubbles, you're the one who mediates, guides, soothes. They won't remember the origin. They'll remember the comfort. That's how the savior illusion works. It turns crisis into credit. But be warned, this isn't a toy. If you overplay it, or cause real harm, people eventually notice. The best Machiavellians know the sweet spot, just enough disruption to create need, never enough to spark suspicion. Because the goal isn't chaos. The goal is to become the indispensable voice of calm, the one people call before anything else, the one they can't imagine navigating stress without. Because if you control the crises, you control the crown, and once you wear the savior mask, no one dares look behind it. Kindness is a virtue. But when it's handed out too easily, too often, without limits or context, it becomes a cage. Tonight, you revisit the warm golden glow of generosity and learn how Machiavelli would see it, not as goodness, but as leverage. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The person who gives you everything often expects everything back, and not all at once. No, the most cunning don't collect their debt in anger or urgency. They let it sit, let it ferment, let it shape your decisions from the inside out, until one day you realize you're not choosing anymore. You're paying. This is the kindness cage. Soft bars, velvet lock, invisible key. You've likely been in one. Someone gave you something, a job referral, a loan, a listening ear, during your worst hour. You thanked them, of course, but weeks later, when they ask for a favor, or for you to keep quiet, or to back them up publicly when you don't agree, you feel trapped. Because how do you say no to someone who helped you? It's not a friendship anymore. It's a contract you didn't know you signed. Let's ground this in psychology. There's a well-studied principle called the norm of reciprocity, a deeply human impulse to repay kindness, even if it's unspoken. It's ancient, pre-language, pre-money. We survived by balancing favors, but like any survival instinct, it can be exploited, and Machiavellians, they exploit it with grace. Here's how it plays out. A manager overpraises you in public, boosts your profile. Suddenly you feel more loyal than ever. So when she asks you to stay late or cover for her, you say yes, even though your gut whispers no. Or maybe it's your parent, always reminding you of the sacrifices they made, how much they gave up, so you could have a better life. Never explicitly asking for obedience, but making it unthinkable to disappoint them. This isn't warmth, this is invisible bondage. Quirky historical note. In 18th century aristocratic France, nobles would perform extravagant acts of public generosity, donating to hospitals, feeding orphans, not purely out of compassion, but to build reputation debt. They were admired, yes, but also owed. These debts bought silence, votes, social protection. Kindness was just the currency, and you somewhere in your life have probably done it too. You've helped someone because it felt right, but deep down you expected something. A return call, a thank you, a favor, and when it didn't come, you felt betrayed. Because even unspoken kindness often carries a ledger. Philosophers still debate whether true altruism exists. Thomas Says believed every gift is a way of exerting control, that no gift is truly free. Alain de Botton would argue that giving is always entangled with identity, that we give to be seen as good, and to feel valuable. So what's the Machiavellian takeaway? It's not to stop being kind, it's to start tracking kindness for what it is. A transaction, a positioning, a chess move dressed as a hug. Here's how you guard against the kindness cage. Step 1. Acknowledge every act of generosity, but interrogate it. Ask, what does this create? Who gains influence here? Step 2. Match gratitude with boundaries. You can appreciate someone's kindness without submitting to their future demands. Step 3. Give, without weaponizing. And watch for those who do. The person who brings up their favors constantly. They're not generous, they're banking influence. And if you've built your own kindness cages, trapping people in cycles of guilt, obligation or moral debt, it's time to ask yourself, are you giving, or are you controlling with a smile? Because true generosity doesn't cage, it releases. But Machiavellian generosity, it tethers, with gold thread. And by the time the other person realizes they can't move freely anymore, they're already calling it love. You probably thought you were in control. After all, you had the answers. You gave the advice. You were the reliable one, the strong one, the wise one. People leaned on you. They came to you. But now, you're starting to notice something. You're tired, you're stuck in the same loops. And worst of all, you don't know who you are without being needed. Tonight, you face the final mirror. You were never the puppet master. You were the puppet. This is the quiet heartbreak of realizing you've been caught in someone else's dependency trap, a web so carefully spun, so softly reinforced, that you mistook it for meaning. Machiavelli would smirk here, because he warned you, in his own way, that those who seek control must also protect themselves from being controlled. And what's more seductive than being important in someone's life? Nothing. That's how they get you. Let's get raw. Maybe you've stayed in a job far too long, not because it fulfilled you, but because your boss kept saying, "I don't know what we'd do without you." Maybe you've remained the therapist friend in your circle, always on call, always absorbing everyone else's crisis, because it makes you feel valuable, but also depleted. Or maybe you've stayed in a relationship long past its expiration date, because the other person always seems one meltdown away from collapse, and you tell yourself, "If I leave, they'll break." You're not staying out of love. You're staying out of fear. Fear that your absence would cause pain. Fear that without their need, you'll lose your identity. This is reverse dependency. You become addicted to being the solution, until your entire self-worth is built on solving other people's messes. Psychologists call this the rescuer identity, often rooted in childhood dynamics where love was transactional. Maybe you had to fix your parents' mood to earn affection, or keep the peace in a chaotic home. Over time, being needed became the only way to feel loved. Jonas Webb describes this as emotional neglect's hidden wound. You learn to meet others' needs before your own, and eventually, you forget your own exist. Quirky historical note: Florence Nightingale, the mother of modern nursing, saved thousands of lives, but privately battled deep depression. She once wrote that she felt trapped in the gratitude of others, unable to live for herself without guilt. The world praised her, and she quietly suffocated under the weight of being indispensable. You start to see the bars of your own kindness cage from the inside, and the person who built it. They may not even know what they've done. People don't always trap you on purpose. Often they're just broken, scared, or unaware. But even unintentional dependency can eat you alive. So what do? Step 1. Admit it. Say the words, "I have confused being needed with being loved." Step 2. Audit your obligations. Write down who relies on you, and how much of that reliance is based on fear or guilt. Step 3. Experiment with absence. Pull back, just a little. Let someone else solve it. Watch what happens. You might find they adapt, or you might find they panic, and that panic is proof that you weren't helping. You were sustaining their comfort zone. Scholars still debate whether freedom from this trap is even possible. Some argue we're always in relational dynamics, always codependent in some form. But others, like Eric Fromm, insist that mature love is union without fusion, where two people stand strong alone and still choose each other. You're not selfish for stepping back. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. You're just tired of being the oxygen tank in someone else's drowning act. And the only way out: cut the tube, let them breathe on their own. Let yourself breathe, because the moment you realize that you've been sustaining dependency out of fear of being irrelevant, you finally understand what Machiavelli meant when he warned, "He who builds power on the needs of others must guard his own needs most of all." It's time to chew through the chain, even if you forged it yourself. You've let go of the leash. You've stopped being the hero. You've walked away from cages dressed as kindness. You've even burned some bridges and watched with a strange peace as no one came chasing after you. And now, for the first time in your life, you ask, "If I'm not needed, then how do I become unforgettable?" Tonight, you cross into the final phase of power, becoming the one they can't leave. Not because you trapped them, not because you carried their burdens, but because your value became so elevated, so multifaceted, so irreplaceably woven into the structure of their reality, that your absence feels like starvation. This is where Machiavelli shifts from manipulator to architect. Because real control doesn't come from guilt, it comes from mastery. Let's make this simple. Most people try to become valuable by doing more, showing up more, being louder, busier, available. But true influence, dangerous influence, comes from creating a vacuum when you leave. And that only happens when you offer something they can't replicate. That something might be emotional clarity. It might be a specific skill. It might be a form of presence, insight, timing, or energy that can't be faked or outsourced. It's not that you're better than others. It's that you've refined your contributions to the point where losing you feels like a downgrade, not just emotionally, but structurally. Let's take a modern example. Think of Steve Jobs. People argue whether he was a genius or just a high-functioning tyrant. But what no one denies is this: after he left Apple the first time, the company visibly declined. Not because they lacked talent, but because Jobs was a design lens, a filter through which innovation passed. He didn't do everything, but what he did defined everything. That's how you become someone they can't leave. Not by being present 24/7s, but by imprinting yourself into the fabric of how they function. Here's how. Step 1. Specialize. Don't be good at everything. Be exceptional at a few things that matter. Deeply. Know more. Think faster. See further. Step 2. Be unpredictable, but consistent. Show up in patterns, but always bring something new. Become the person whose input is never expected, but always missed when absent. Step 3. Invest in transformation, not transaction. People forget who helped them finish tasks, but they never forget who helped them become a new version of themselves. Be that person. There's a psychological phenomenon known as the self-expansion model. It says people bond most strongly with those who help them grow, evolve, or become more complex. So if your presence expands someone's sense of identity, you'll live in their memory like a second skin. Quirky historical note. In feudal Japan, certain swordsmiths were so revered that samurai believed their blades had souls. They wouldn't just fight with them, they'd sleep beside them, mourn them if lost. Why? Because those weapons weren't tools, they were extensions of the warrior's identity. You, in the right role, can be that. Not an object, not a helper, but an extension of someone's strategic, emotional, or creative function. Philosophers still argue whether this level of embedded influence is ethical, or if it becomes a soft form of enslavement. Some say it's intimacy, others say it's ego. Machiavelli would simply raise an eyebrow and ask, does it work? Because the goal isn't to be adored, the goal is to be required. To become the what now question when you leave. To become the absence they feel every time they try to move forward without you. And to get there, you stop performing, you stop pleasing, you start refining, you disappear just enough to make your value echo in the gaps. That's how you go from support to foundation, from helper to necessity. Because when they say, I can't do this without you, and it's true, you're no longer fighting for influence. You are the influence. Section 15. And now, the final play. The one they never see coming. The most Machiavellian move of all. You've built the foundation. You've engineered the dependency. You've mastered the art of being needed, then being unforgettable. Now, you vanish. Tonight, you execute the final, brutal, brilliant tactic. Disappear at the peak. Because if you want your value to become legendary, not just respected, not just admired, but etched into someone's psychological bloodstream, you must leave at the exact moment when they think they need you the most. It's cruel, it's precise, and it works like nothing else. Let's break it down. You've spent weeks, months, maybe years being the solution, the advisor, the lifeline. You've paced your generosity, you've refined your offerings, you've pulled back strategically, only to return stronger. And just as they're leaning in fully, completely unconsciously tangled in you, you're gone. You don't ghost, you exit. Clean, clear, no drama, no apology. You walk away when the applause is loudest, when the hunger is sharpest, and in doing so, you force them to confront the terrifying silence of your absence. That silence is your immortality. There's a reason ancient oracles spoke only once. Why prophets vanished into deserts, why artists die young and become eternal. Absence freezes value. It halts the natural decay of familiarity. It elevates you into something untouchable. Psychologically, we call this the Zeigarnik effect. People remember unfinished experiences more vividly than completed ones. If you leave before your arc feels resolved, they replay you endlessly. They don't even need you present anymore. You've become a loop in their minds. Quirky historical tidbit. When Napoleon escaped Elba and returned to power for a final 100 days, people cheered him like a resurrected god. Why? Because he'd disappeared at his political peak, and his absence had transformed failure into myth. When he came back, he was no longer a man, he was a symbol. You want that? You must vanish before the ending. Leave behind a version of yourself they can't upgrade or replace. Here's how. Step 1. Time your exit at maximum relevance. Not when you're tired, not when you're fading, but when they're still leaning in. Step 2. Leave something unfinished. A project, a promise, a question. The tension becomes glue. Step 3. Create no new openings. Don't hint at return. Don't dangle possibility. Let the myth harden. Machiavelli wouldn't just approve, he'd call this the crowning maneuver, where you stop being a player and become part of the architecture of memory and the beauty. You don't even need to be extraordinary. You just need to be incomplete, because scholars still argue whether people love us for who we are or for what we withhold, and those who vanish at the peak, they withhold everything. It won't be easy. You'll want to check back in. You'll want to hear what they're saying about you. You'll want to see if they've moved on. Don't. Because if you reappear too soon, you dilute the effect. You remind them you're human. But if you stay gone, you become a question with no answer. And questions haunt. So tonight you close the circle. You've mastered the puppet strings. You've built need. You've withdrawn. You've taught value. You've escaped their grip. And now, you make them live with your shadow. That's how you become dangerously valuable. And then, unforgettable. Now, slow everything down. The room is still. The light from your screen is the only thing glowing. You're no longer racing through tactics or absorbing dark wisdom. You're just here, sinking into the silence you've earned. It's strange, isn't it? How much of your life you've spent trying to be seen, heard, appreciated, only to realize that the real power was never in being liked. It was in being needed, strategically. And now that you know the rules, now that you've seen how value can be curated like art, you no longer scramble for attention. You build your gravity, slowly, carefully, beautifully. Breathe in. You are not obligated to be everything to everyone. You are allowed to withdraw. You are allowed to let others feel your absence. You are allowed to become untouchable. Imagine walking through your next chapter with the quiet strength of someone who knows they're a pillar, not because they shout, but because when they step back, the room tilts. Sleep now with that knowing tucked into your chest. You are no longer chasing power, you are the power. And as the night softens around you, remember this: the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who know exactly when to leave it.